Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss here again at allpointstv.com for another edition of the program called What's Going On. And we come on every Monday from 2 o'clock to 3. And we have another treat for you this afternoon in terms of another program comes on at 3:30. And that's the Tourist Black History Corner that comes on the second and fourth Mondays of each month. And they'll be here in the studio shortly. They have not arrived yet, but when they get here, they'll be asking me to get out. They like to start on time. Okay, glad to have you with us. And we are going to talk a little bit about a couple of issues that I think you're interested in. I'm certainly interested in one of them in particular, and that's the nonsense that's taking place down in New Orleans today. It's amazing, these politicians. Well, it's not amazing. It's not amazing in the sense it's surprising. Mayor Landrieu, who has a lot of political ambitions, obviously, and comes out of a family tradition of politicians, will be doing, and has already done, as a matter of fact, it started at 1 o'clock today, over a ceremony of dismantling monuments. The first of 4 monuments be dismantled. Confederate monuments that will be dismantled in New Orleans. And it is another continuation of the attack by the, really it's from a number it's from a variety of sources, but this attack is a cover-up. Whenever I see the Democratic Party being in the forefront of calling for the, you gotta be kidding me. The Democratic Party calling for the dismantlement of monuments that actually they're mocking the history of the Democratic Party, but some of the history of the Democratic Party is not all of what is represented to be. And they mock the parts of it that should not be mocked, and that's what these monuments are about. But that's the new history that's being taught now, and people have a tendency to jump. Politicians have a tendency to jump. I don't know if you notice this or not. Jump right in the middle of anything that seems like it's going to be a vote gathering. It's a convention of vote gathering. And if it will secure votes and will further secure the ambitions of politicians, you can believe they're going to be in the forefront of it.
I call politicians prostitutes in 3-piece suits. That's what they are. They're prostitutes. If one group says enough or has got enough clout, they'll say whatever they want them to say. Then they'll go down the road. Hillary Clinton did that, and so did Bill. One down the road, she said one thing. Down the road further to some other group she's talking, said the same. It's all recorded, and they play them beside, and they have no problem. They don't have no problem trying to reconcile that. Which
they're vipers, and it's amazing to me that people would have any confidence in these politicians. They have a track record of 100% of nonsense, no successes. I mean, when have we seen a politician do anything that's been beneficial to anyone other than a politician? And John, of any record where politicians have done anything that did not have self-benefit and then went out and in a wider way and benefited and captured a population of people where it also benefited them as well.
Yeah, my mom always said it. She always said one time, she always tells the story of like this politician, he and his wife were in a hotel room during his campaign. It was wrapping up, it was election night, and they were sitting there, and she was kind of dozing off in the bed, and the election results are coming on the television. He wins. He wakes her up. We won. I won. She goes, honestly? He goes, well, let's not go into that. So, yeah, it's like that's, I mean, they're beyond two-faced. I mean, there's not even a word for these people.
I don't know what word you would use for them, but it would not be any words as in the positive domain, because their track record is there for everybody to see. And it's amazing to me that people don't see the record of these politicians. And they continue to wait for them to do something that would be beneficial to the a larger society and to the country, and they'll be waiting because that's not going to happen. The politicians are into self benefit, and so down in New Orleans today, it is another travesty in terms of this continued attack upon. It is always to attack the South is always in vogue to appear to be taking the high moral ground against people who cannot respond to you because all the ones whose monuments are up there to be taken down, those persons are dead and they can't vote. And you can believe that when they start doing that, they're doing it in those places where the number of persons that are in there, the descendants of those persons, outnumbered by those in the city. New Orleans is what percentage of blacks, and a majority city council that's black. So you know when you start going in there talking, we're going to take these monuments down, it plays very well in front of the public. But the question is whether or not that is really the right thing to do in terms of what it amounts to. And then what it amounts to more than anything else is a kind of historical erasure where it is equivalent to book burning. And also the chiseling used to go on in ancient times where they would go in there and chisel off the walls the record of the person that preceded them, and they would chisel out what that person did, and then any replacement would be what they're doing. And so it's book burning and it's erasure of history through other means. In this mean here is taking monuments down, and it's all done for political purposes. It's not anything to do with anything that has to do with something positive, because the history has to be straightened out, and the historical record is very clear. I have a lot of admirations for the Confederate States. And it has nothing to do with what they're talking about. This war was about. It was fought between 1861 and 1865. It's ridiculous to be talking about a war being fought over slavery. You got slavery in both camps. They had slavery in the North as well as in the South. And so how is a war being fought over slavery when the combatants in the war, you take Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant's wife was the inheritors of slaves. He didn't disavow the inheritance. And so he was a slave owner. But Robert E. Lee was not a slave owner, and there is a Union, the major general in the Union Army, and Lincoln kept looking for the right general to prosecute this war, and he got this madman, Ulysses S. Grant, who used his soldiers as cannon fodder, and just fought a war of attrition. In other words, they had more soldiers in the Northern Army than they had in the Southern Army. What Ulysses Grant was going to do was just simply fight a war of attrition, knowing that the numbers would eventually win the outcome of the war. This man had no respect for the life of the soldiers that were fighting on the Union side. Yet he was a slave owner all the time the war was being fought, and after the war came to a close. And when he became the 18th president, there was Lincoln the 16th, Andrew Johnson. Then there was Ulysses S. Grant, who was elected to the first of two terms in 1868, and would go out in 1876, after which they had a negotiated president through a deal made between the power structures in the North and the South, where Rutherford B. Hayes became the president. And when he became the 19th president, that was because of a negotiated deal where the Republican Party was making deals in order to stay in power so that it could do what it was doing, which was to run the country as a Whig, an extension of the Whig Party, which is what this war is really about when you go back and look at the research behind it. But, I mean, this was a sectional war. But Abraham Lincoln was a sectional president. And he's the first sectional president this country had. You see, when you take the side that when you take the point of view publicly that I take, that these monuments should be allowed to stand as they are, and we have to get the history straight, then you start running into a lot of this gibberish that goes on out here in public, passing for the best point of view and the best information, none of which is documented. You face a lot of noise and a lot of animosity, but I always contend the truth doesn't need any friends, and I don't seek any friends in it. I'm telling the truth that the people that were prosecuting this war from the North were prosecuting this war because of the fact that they used the South as a subjugated section of the country that was a tax province for Northern interests. And that's as clear from the historical record as anything in the historical record. And I'm right and they're wrong. And these books that are coming out now to correct the history, because what we have now is a false history that's in place. And so Landrieu down there in New Orleans is talking about pulling down the first of 4 monuments. It started today at 1 o'clock. So that ceremony of I like to have these ceremonies where you want to make sure you bring the press to it and to get the most bang for the buck. And of course, they have ambitions that they're running for other offices later on. And this plays very well in front of a gullible public that does not discern what's really going on and why this political noise is being made by these politicians who, if they had a principle, they would probably kill them. But that's what these politicians do, and that's what Landrieu is doing down there in New Orleans. If you look at the historical record, you'll see that in many ways the South was right, which is the additional book written by the writers James Ronald Kennedy and his brother Walter Donald Kennedy. This book that I brought to the studio asked a question: was Jefferson Davis right? And the sequel to the book is called, it doesn't ask the question, the sequel, it just comes out and says that the South was right. And I would agree with that 1,000%. And that agreement does not come without a lot of venom by people that don't know what they're talking about. The difference between them and myself is that they don't know what they're talking about, and I do.
How about our former constitutional scholar president? I mean, I'm just dismayed that he got to keep that appellation, but nobody really challenged it. I went, you can quote it, Mr. Moss. By the way, people, you watch past shows, you can actually quote it verbatim. But I don't think he could. I think he'd have a hard time with it anyway.
Obama's not a scholar of anything. They're making such a big heyday about him coming out for the first time to speak publicly after his candidate lost the presidency on November the 8th, 2016. And they're making a big deal about the fact that he's coming out now. He's getting ready to speak. And it's the first public speak he's going to be making at the University of Chicago in a panel discussion today. And they're making a big deal as if he's going to be saying the thing. The man had a failed presidency, and he really should be quiet. He's done enough damage to this country.
Why didn't you just have the decency like Jimmy Carter did to shut up for several years until after, people now he's the statesman when before he was a miserable president with a miserable...
One of the worst in history.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Jimmy Carter now this expert. I mean, I can't believe they sent him all over the world, as being some kind of ambassador, diplomatic things for us. And he was piss poor as a president. He was an embarrassment. I was in high school when he was, and when he finally got out of office. And it was a relief to see him get out of office,
A one-term president, and if this country had not been playing the race card, Obama would have been a one-term president. See, everybody talk about the race card. We don't talk about the race card being played in 2012 because there was nothing in Obama's resume as president from 2009. He won in 2008, but he took off in 2009. There was nothing in this man's resume that would have recommended a second term. And if the race card had not been played really in the first term, he'd not have been president because no white person could have been president based upon that resume of non-accomplishments. And he didn't accomplish anything while he was president either. And nobody can name what it was that this man accomplished. But when you say that, you get a lot of this noise out here because you're supposed to be, in fact, supportive of the first black president because everybody's playing racial politics in this country. And I'm not playing that because the facts are the facts. And anyone that thinks knows the facts better than I know, that's one confrontation if you're talking about an intellectual confrontation along those lines, I'm ready to have that with many of the scholars in the country.
I'm going to ask you a question here. It's slowly out of the blue, and it's probably unfair because I did give you a chance to prepare for it. Because I'm thinking it's the same way. I've heard you talk before. I mean, I'm the same. I'm pretty much. I have no real. I'm still trying to get respect for no respect for past presidents. I don't. I mean, everybody. There were staunch Republicans. Oh, Reagan, the great Reagan. They got pictures of him up, and I went. He violated the Constitution. I mean, Carter was a dismal. we don't have the time to cover what he. I don't know what he did right. Okay?
Right.
But I mean, that's like what. I mean, I don't know if there's ever been a president in my lifetime or before my lifetime, slightly before, that was even worth. It actually it follows what the president is supposed to be doing.
Right.
And they're all trying to live up to like creating a cult of personality, like Kennedy, John F. Kennedy. And let's face it, if he wasn't assassinated, his whole thing would have been gone down and basically as kind of a neither aware of kind of a presidency.
John, we talk about public servants, and we have allowed them to position themselves in that space. But the public servants are the producers of the society. Those that are actually performing some service by their production. Let's say the person that made bread, that's a public service. If you can tell me what public service is in terms of a person passing restraints upon the liberty of the country and being wordsmiths, what kind of public service is being accommodated by those things, then I will give you credit for saying that the politicians are public servants. But unless you can actually show me where that is a service to the public, then you can't make that claim. The public service is done by those who are producers. And all politicians are produced, and this is their historical record throughout wherever you find them, doesn't matter what country, but certainly in this country here as well, is that what they produce is a lot of noise. And all they do is pass certain laws that restrain liberty, and it goes beyond the real reason why we had installed institutional politicians. We've always had politicians, but the institutionalization of their office was because we set up government as a protective remedy to bullies, and what comes with the territory of politicians. It's not that we wanted them necessarily wanted government, but you got to have some folks in there, and those are the politicians. They found a way to wedge themselves in there, and over time they grew and grew and grew and grew into this monstrosity, so that over time what they were intended to do, which was to stand there as a guardian over internal and external threats, and also to act as a referee between the members of the constituent groups, so that we could have a referee that would be an independent party, not subject to either one of the two causes in the dispute, and they can make an independent judgment. That's been so far out of here than the man in the moon. And that tendency, by the way, was one in which the framers of the Constitution were aware of, because they had studied the governments in history, and they were trying to, in fact, take that impulse and restrain it. That's why you have the itemization in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8.
Did you ever see the movie The Last Emperor that came out in the 80s? It's about Puyi or something. It was the last emperor before China before the communists took over the country. And it's really good, but basically he was captured. He had to go through re-education camps. But before that came to the head, they were the eunuchs actually were forced out, trying to reform. The eunuchs were forced out of the Forbidden City, and they actually started retaliating because they had ran things for so long. It was basically, you talk about deep state. That's exactly what all this is, and you can look at that movie and see so many parallels. Basically, they have the nuclear option, and they were burning stuff as they were leaving. They were burning. They came back. They did sabotage on their own within the Forbidden City, and there was smoke rising because they didn't want their tracks uncovered. Where they had buried their dirty stuff, and so I mean it is, and DC's that ramped up 1,000,000 times, and because let's face it, we got more money than China would.
That's the problem, and when you have corruption, and that's a bad combination, John, to have corruption that is complemented by the wealth of a nation. You know, there are a lot of things to be said positive about America's wealth. And we're not as wealthy as we think we are, but there are, because of the reserve currency, we can say that we're a wealthy nation. Everybody's using our currency. And that makes you wealthy because you can export your inflation. But when you combine that with political power, then that becomes a problem. Because what you're doing is that you're putting in back of this corruption a tremendous monetary, influence, where you can actually buy, and distribute your power around the world by simply distributing the money that's in back of the power. And that's what we see going on, and that's why that combination has been that congruency between the two has been has such a bad consequence for this country. And you talk about cleaning the swamp. You got to first of all separate it from. You can't clean the swamp until you understand why the swamp exists and how it exists. And this idea you're going to vote it out of existence. You're going to vote a candidate in there and he's going to clean the swamp out. You can have good intention. Now, I'm not saying anything about the intent here necessarily, but you can have good intent. But the swamp does not lend itself to a voting process in terms of people just simply going to surrender because if people vote a candidate in and then they therefore surrender to the majoritarian voice and they have no other proclivities toward the acquisition of power and its use to their own benefit and certainly their own special interests because now the mandate has changed.
Besides, we've gone on this before, you remove the faces that you see publicly, but you're not going to remove the people that have been in all these offices and established. Some of these people in D.C. have families that are passed on this or basically slipped into one position, gone into another. They've been in there 4 or 5 generations, 6 generations.
That's the problem.
They had a TV. You see some people actually. There's remnants of people who were in the FDR administration still around, sniffing around D.C.
Well, John, you saw it a little bit of it when you were talking about Gorsuch. I think Gorsuch is 46 years old. The new member of the Supreme Court, Neil Gorsuch. What they were really saying here is that their concern was that, this Democratic Party now, their concern was that here's a person that's going to be on the court for years to come. And that's what we have. You see, you put a person in place right now, but it doesn't mean that the influence stays within the contemporary time period of the assignment. They allow them. What they do is they get appointed in the present. They go and then in the background in the future, where they're not appointed in that time period in the future, but the appointment still stands because it was appointment made in the past. And you look at all these appointments in government, and you have some of them that are elected and they come and go, but the ones that are put there as part of the bureaucracy and institutional base of government, those persons remain in place. And they're the ones actually running the government, to be honest with you, behind the scenes. And you start creating these other departments like you do in terms of these czars that don't even have to go before into the public bodies to be confirmed. I don't know how we got into that in terms of, we had enough problems in terms of the cabinet.
You're the expert on the Constitution. I don't mean that, flippantly. I mean that sincerely. What's going on now with all these appointments? Is that the way the Constitution wanted out? It
was never intended for them to be going. Every time you see, the check and balance system was the barrier against government getting out of control. This idea that you can begin to appoint some folks that don't go before the Senate. You see, the Senate was there initially, and this is the brilliance of the framers. The brilliance of the Senate was the senators were to be the eyes and ears in the federal government, sent there to the seat of federal power as the officers of the state. So the senators were to be elected by the state legislatures, and they were going there not representatives of the people per se, although the people the states made up of the people, but to go there as specific representatives of the states. You see, the House was intended to be the people's body, It is the body that represents the people directly. Well, the states have to have a voice in the federal government. Otherwise, all they are is captured provinces of the federal government. They've been subjected to the federal tyranny because their voice has been muted, and therefore they can't speak to what the federal government does. And there is no check and balance on the federal government on the vertical level. See, one thing we don't think about when we talk about the check and balance system. We talk about it on the horizontal level. We talk about the Article 1 that sets up the legislative body and the branch that in fact passes the laws. And then we talk about Article 2, which in fact sets up the executive branch. So that branch, therefore, if the laws have been faithfully passed in both of the chambers, you said, in fact, that's inside of Congress is a check and balance. Both chambers have to agree. The state's voice have to agree, and the people's voice they have to agree in order to have the legislation passed, and then it has to go to the president's desk in order to be signed into law. So you see the check and balance system all over the federal system, trying to disaggregate power and make sure it doesn't get out of control. But we always talk about it in terms of the horizontal level, where you have the legislative branch and executive branch that are set up by Articles 1 and 2, and then the third branch, which that has been, this overreach of the third branch is really something that was not foreseen, and it certainly wasn't intended, but it got out of control by the fifth Chief Justice, who stayed there 34 years from 1801 to 1835, John Marshall. That's when the federal courts assumed a lot more latitude than what was intended. But you talk about the check and balance system on the horizontal level. We don't see it as also intended vertically. The framers were just looking at the federal. Here's a ruse. The federal government was the way it's set up right now. The federal government is to be the overseer of how much power is going to allocate to itself. Give me a break. It's like having the fox in the hen house. And so how many eggs in the hen house are you going to delegate to the hens, and how much you going to allocate to the fox? When the fox in the hen house, all the eggs are his. And so this idea, the federal government is going to be pursuant in its power to the limits of its power, which is going to set for itself. How do you think that's going to work out, by the way? The federal give me a break. The federal government is going to be the voice that subsumes its own authority on how much authority it will have as it is symbolically in the hen house. And so how much power in the hen house do the hens have if the fox is in the hen house is going to allocate to the hens if he has total control and his voice is total? Or that other example we use a lot of times where they have the two wolves at the table and there's one lamb there and the discussion over dinner. So what do you think is for dinner? Would it be wolf meat or lamb chops? That's the voice I'm talking about in terms of how you silence. If one voice can be silenced, then the voice that prevails absolutely calls a shot and has all the weight delegated to itself, which it would deny itself that delegation of power, because to deny that delegation of power, and that enumeration of power would be then to take something away from that voice, which it will not take away from itself, because that voice is enhanced by the wider array of power that's accrued to it. So it doesn't make any sense for it to be a judge that checks on his own power, which was not intended. That's why the the states sent their representatives there, so the states will have a voice over the federal government. And that's what they don't get. Landrieu down in New Orleans doesn't understand that. And if he does understand, he's another dishonest politician. But if he doesn't understand, he's just another know-nothing politician. Because the South wasn't standing up and picking up arms against the federal government, as the history books tried to show, because they were trying to maintain slavery. Slavery was on its way out in the world. And it was no less the case here as it was anywhere else. The question is how you're going to begin to accommodate that. But this war is not over slavery. And if it's over slavery, why did it take Lincoln 2 years to wake up to it? One of the things that I wrote a post on this today, because I'm offended by what's happening down in New Orleans. And I was offended by what they did down in South Carolina, using this guy named Root. As if that has anything to do with any of those monuments. Where did this guy probably couldn't even read what's on those monuments. And they're going to use his going off in South Carolina as a way to do what? Not to prosecute him. He's the one that did the shooting. This guy walked into a church and people befriended him, and he sat there for at least an hour, maybe a couple of hours, because they were treating him so nicely. What he came there to do is stayed his hand, because they were treating him with such respect and kindness, and put him in the group. They sat there for an hour and a half dealing with his devil mind of whether he could go through with this, given how they were treating him. And after a while, he just simply, the demons won out, and the guy went up there and started pull his gun out and started killing folks. Now, what that has to do with the Confederate flag, somebody can explain this to me, but so far, nobody has done so. It has nothing to do with any of that. There was nobody in the Confederacy calling for anybody to go into a church. Give me a break. And sit there among people who are befriending you and start shooting you. There's nobody calling for that. That flag doesn't represent that. But they're going to take that and use that to continue to insult the South and to stand them down because of that symbol. And they know better than most, those who are calling for it, know what that symbol is. It's a symbol of standing up against federal tyranny, which is what the South was doing. And I wrote about that in my post today. And I dare any of these scholars in this country, you come in there on my post with that noise, and I'm going to stand you down. You can teach that in your classrooms, but if you come out, I dare any of them, they better not get on that post. And they won't do it either. They know, some of them know. It's not that they don't know that I'm out here. And I've been on some of those lines. And when I was at the university, I was on some of those lines with them. And they weren't happy with what I was writing. And I challenged them to come online and stop hiding. I won't call this guy's name out, but I saw him down in Detroit last year. He did a workshop down there at the Mary Wright Museum. And I'm sitting there listening to him talk. I didn't want to tell him who I was. He knew. But if I had told him my name, he would have known who I was, because we went back and forth on some things internal, and I told him some things that I told him to get my name off that list. You're gonna censor what I write, and you can't, rather than argue with the position I took, they're gonna censor me in terms of this one private blog the history professors had, and I was on that blog. And I must tell you something, people write me offline. They wouldn't write me online, but they write me offline agreeing with me. They would agree with me they would actually agree with me offline. They would never say that online. They would say, and they would ask, because I was the new kid on the block, and I was teaching public school, but I went down there, and I was teaching college at night. I went down in the daytime when I retired. And they would write me offline and ask me offline, who are you? Because you know what? It's like everybody has to be in lockstep, because nobody supposed to come out and pose another way of looking at the historical record. It's like you have what would you call it? It's like a party interest. And you're supposed to have one point of view. You see that with Van Coulter, who was supposed to be at Berkeley on the 27th, and they don't want to speak because Ann Coulter brings another point of view. They don't want that point of view on that campus. It's to be one point of view. And I didn't understand that when I first went down there in the daytime. I was going down to the university at night, and I was teaching my class and going home. When I went down there to sit in the office, and now I'm getting a whole consortium of things, I began to listen to the dialogue and go to the seminars, and that's when I realized, hey, this is supposed to be a party line. And I'm raising my hand, and I'm raising my hand, and I want to be heard. They would say, are there any professors in here that have anything to say? I raise my hand. I have something to say. I object. And that was a problem. One lady, by the way, I have to tell you this as we can get back to our discussion. One lady felt so sorry for me in that one forum. She came down and said, told me you have a lot of courage to be in here saying what you just said. She was not on the staff or not a student at the university. She was a student at another place, and she came down and while everybody was hollering at me, and she thought I needed some help. I didn't need any help. I was very comfortable with that. I didn't listen to all that. No, you get out of here. You don't know anything. And these people, like there's one guy down in Detroit at the museum that wanted to censor me. I didn't identify myself, but I did stand up there and ask him a question. I don't have respect for this guy, this jerk, who tried to censor speech because he disagreed with. See, one thing that's happening right now, a lot of people think that their objection is an argument, that their objection to speech is a critique of the validity of the speech, and that their objection invalidates the speech. That's why they don't want to be heard. Because they think that if they object to it, then that invalidates it. Not based on the arguments they bring to it, which if they were certain of the arguments, they would make the argument and not repress it. They repress the speech. Not to, in fact, put speech next to it as its own argument against it. They want to stop it. And that's no different than the brown shirts. There's no different than, it's Hitlerian. It's Hitler-like to do something like that. These people are fascists. And those of us who believe in free speech and will in fact fight for it, I'm not, this idea, I'll fight for your right, I would disagree with you and I'll fight for your right to say it. I'm not so much about doing any fighting. I'm for standing up against the repression of the alternative voice. Those people that have an alternative point of view, they might be able to teach you something. But to say that you're going to suppress that, that is really fascism passing for enlightenment. No person that is secure in the position they take and have done the study that in fact put something behind the point of view would be that uncomfortable with the point of view that they carry. These people are not scholars, because no scholar would do that. I can't even imagine. Well, some of them have some information. I don't know how I would define that psychology, but I don't think you can be a scholar, quite frankly, if you are one that advocates the suppression of scholarship. I don't know how you can be a scholar and do that. That you want to, in fact, quiet the voice that there's an opposition to the voice that you have based upon some scholarly claims that you make. You might have some scholarship behind your claims, but we won't know that unless the other guy that has scholarly acumen behind his claims or her claims can, in fact, come together so we can begin to wrestle with the two positions or other positions and come to some resolution of which one of those voices is right. I need to know all of the history in order to know which of the history is acceptable based upon the record. And I wrote about that today on my post. And I dare any of these so-called, I won't say so-called, I dare any of these scholars to get on there with that noise. They're not going to do it either. They better not do it. I dare them to do it. You try it. You're not going to be a happy camper. That's just the way it is. And this guy over here, at Harvard University, boy, I can't tell you how disgusted I am with this guy. The guy is going to try to tell us that the Federalist Papers were intended to stop someone like Donald Trump from being president. So the people have now made made their verdict. We've gone to the polls, and we have voted for the next president of the United States. We have the popular vote. We're going to go there and we're going to do it. The popular vote to be the first vote we take, but the validation of the popular vote will be the electoral vote. But the popular vote is not the popular vote over the country. The popular vote is the popular vote in the states. Who has said that before? Do these people understand that it is the popular vote? Let me teach something here that's been missed by all these scholars. Every last one of them. It is a majority vote. But can you understand it's a majority vote in the 50 states and not just one single majority vote? You know, people are making a fool of themselves talking about Hillary Clinton won more votes. So what? Did she win more states?
You know, this would have happened 60 years ago, like when my parents were kids, because they actually were taught this stuff in class in school.
Yeah.
Nowadays,
don't last.
I mean, what are they taught now? How to play a video game, how to hook up. Yeah, I mean, that's all they're taught. You know?
John, I was surprised to find out. John, are you aware that they're not even teaching cursive writing now in school?
Yeah, I've heard that, yeah.
John, how do they sign their name? If you have to be a signature to your identity. And if you can only print is, what grade did you start writing cursive, John?
Oh, first grade, second grade, yeah.
I mean, we start printing in first grade, kindergarten, but around the third or fourth grade, you start learning to write in cursive, I think. I know I didn't go to high school to learn cursive writing. Now they don't have cursive writing taught in school.
No, because see, we got to teach gender role appreciation. We got to teach, sensitivity 101, 102. I mean, and then they put them on a computer. They don't. I mean, and then they say our kids are smarter now. No, they're more worldly, but it doesn't make them more intelligent. Okay, they're intelligent in some ways. I mean, but let's face it. I guess they got reading down. I mean, but I know how to read before I went to school. So I mean, teachers weren't that big of a thing for me. I learned how to read before I went to school. So
yeah, most parents will prepare the child so that they can read. By the time they get to first grade, they're already reading. The school slowed the reading process down by giving those hidden messages in these books called. Listen, this the name of this book. These Dick and Jane books. You don't think there was anybody a mindset in back of that? Dick and Jane books. These are sick people. I mean, they have these. We think these people are innocent. They don't have an agenda in back of this. The agenda all you have now, John. All you have now is that the agenda has been picked up. You see, the Dick and Jane books were these books that didn't teach anything. Run, see spot, jump. Now the same mindset that's in back of putting those Dick and Jane books out there in front of us. They now got the kids putting cucumbers in the classroom and putting a condom on them. It's the same mindset.
Yeah, it's like what it is like. I guess what was his name? He was a teacher. He was a big philosopher they brought into schools. I mean, he was Chicago school and got I'm drawing a blank here. He was one of the Deweys.
Okay.
Was it John Dewey? John Dewey. It was like this, like basically he wanted to teach what was useful. So I mean that's what he said, and that was his whole thing. And now it's like everything. I mean they don't say what is going to stand a test of time. I don't know. It's a whole. I'm just glad I don't have children.
John, you're making some excellent points. You've read very widely, so you know what's going on, and our public is like that too. We have a very educated public, and they're pretty much. If you come to the studio right here, you got to be pretty much into some information, and otherwise you wouldn't be interested in what we're doing so much. But we're getting more and more people that's interested in what we're doing, and of course they're the critics also, and that's fine. We don't. One thing that I don't think the studio stands for is this idea that all persons should be of the same mindset, and we should all be in agreement on all issues, as if we are, in some kind of Gestapo group. That's not what this thing is about. But it is really amazing that I think schools that are talking about somebody ought to feel good about themselves just so that, I just feel good about myself. And you ask them why. I used to ask that in my classroom. Why? Why do you feel good about yourself? You feel so good about yourself, what can you do? Your self-esteem didn't come out of somebody making you feel good about yourself. That's part of the drug problem in the country. People want to feel good without doing anything. I feel good about myself because I know I'm competent. That makes me feel good. I know that when I put something on Facebook, and I had I had a post. I have a certain group of people that read everything I write on Facebook because it's free. I'm not charging anything. They didn't get no education. I'm an educator, so some of them say, well, we can learn some things. It's free. We have to go to class and pay for it. Because I try to say some things that that's not common out here in the public domain. And so I wrote one article. We were all on the same page. I'm critical of Obama because Obama was a bad president. I didn't care whether he was black, brown, green, or what. He was a bad president. That's what I said. So all the ones agreed with me about Obama. Oh, I was just so wonderful. But I wasn't writing it because they were saying that. I was writing it because it's true. Obama was a bad president. He'll be a bad president next year. And history recorded him as a bad president. They got him down there at number 12 right now. Number 12 my foot. We've had 45 presidents, and he's down there at the bottom. Worse, and like Thomas Sowell said, worse than Carter. And you're down there below Carter, then that's saying a lot.
But I was like, when I was seeing him at Carter, because I was in high school when he finally got out of office, I knew he was pathetic then, so I always had this ability to judge presidents pretty decently, I think, especially for the time, my age group. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't believe people rhapsodize about this man. I went, why? Oh, he's such a decent man. He's such a oh my God! I said, what's your definition of decent?
Decent man?
Yeah, but with Carter. Carter was not a decent man. No. He was not a decent man.
These people, you could say devious. I can accept the word devious. Now you start going up the alphabet to the word decent. That's ABC. That's ABCs.
Well, Carter always reminded me of a kid in my school that he was a sociopath. He'd go around smiling all the time like Jimmy Carter did. And he'd bash your head in, bash your head in. And Jimmy Carter just gave me the same kind of willies, man. That guy wasn't all there mentally, and I still say that about him.
Well, Carter came in. I don't think anybody said this either, but Carter came in for the same reason Obama came in. People want an outsider. They get tired of these politicians. They think they can do something by going outside the beltway and get another politician and bring them in, and they get the same thing they got in terms of the early result. These haven't been in the same space.
Well, what they bring up that Carter's church, up to the time he ran for president, was a segregated church. Why do they ever bring that up in the dialogue?
Yeah, people, as long as people are associating voluntarily, that is, I don't want to confound the problems of the country by making people's affiliations mandatory. But in Carter's case, he got to be president in 77. He's elected in 76 because they looked at Watergate and, of course, looked at Gerald Ford. After Nixon went out, we had Ford. And who wanted to continue that? And so when Ford was running again and on his own, having come through the back door through the Watergate, we had, there was a rumor going around that Ford played football back in the 30s with his helmet off. That explained why he was so dizzy. And when he ran for election on his own, people voted him out. That's how Carter got in there. But it wasn't anything to do with Carter. After Carter showed what he represented, he was a one-term president, and that was it. And he was out of there. And then we got Reagan in there, and Reagan was 8 years, a two-term president. And after that is over, we got his vice president, and that was Bush Senior. He got in and told us to read his lips. So I'm agreeing with John that when you start to go down the line and look at these presidents, where is there any greatness here? The greatness is not really the politicians. The greatness is really, if you want to look at greatness and talk about public servants, the servants are the ones that serve the society by producing something the society needs. Does it need more noise? Do we actually need more politicians? If we really want to do a public service in terms of the political order, let's cut down the number of people we have up there in Washington.
I wouldn't really care if they're greatness, just that the body count was lower and they didn't go around spending money all the time. Those two things there, if they did that, I'd be clapping my hands saying, you're on your rise to being pretty decent. But, greatness, how's that defined as a president?
Yeah, they should read Abbott Schleye's book called The Forgotten Man. She does a very good job in that first chapter of that book of talking about, she names them as A, B, and C. And she talks about, this is how politicians operate. Politician A sees a problem they want to solve. And they talk about the problem with politician B. And then they go and enlist person C to resolve the problem that both A and B have decided upon as the problem that needs to be resolved. Now, who is C? C is the forgotten man, the taxpayer. They want to solve a problem, and they want C to pay for it.
MASH, they had this episode of MASH where they actually made an announcement. They said, after 2 weeks of negotiations, this is during the Korean War, the negotiators have come up with the fact that the flagpoles in the area are going to be 32 feet in diameter length. That's after 2 weeks of negotiations, that's the point they got to. So, and that's exactly what you're talking about when it comes to politicians.
Politicians come a dime a dozen, and that's because of inflation. We have to be honest. We have to be honest here. That public servants are not politicians. Let's get that straight. And nothing else today. Let's get that straight. Public servants are not politicians. Public servants are producers, and they produce. And because it is a public service, you pay them for it. We don't pay them. We don't pay people. We shouldn't pay people for things that don't serve the public.
Nowadays, we got to pay them to leave. Like they're like cookers. You pay them to leave.
Yeah, you pay them, and really, to be paying politicians is quite a contradiction, quite frankly, because and to be paying at a higher rate than you pay other persons. That's really something, because the question is, what are they producing for the exchange? You give them currency, and you get in return what? And see, if I go to the store, the person put bread on the shelf, I pay them at the store for the bread, and I give them the currency, and I bring the bread home. That's a public service, because I don't have to go to home and bake the bread. And now I'm thinking about it, yum. I have got to have some bread this evening for dinner. That's a public service. I don't have to go in the kitchen and bake the bread, because I can go to the store and do it, and do something else with the hours I save by not being in the kitchen, having to be a baker. That's a public service. But in terms of this thing they talk about here, that's not so. Next week, what I want to do, I'm just going to watch this play out in terms of the New Orleans. But next week, what I want to do, I want to give a fuller discussion about the Civil War, so that we can have a better understanding of all these tricks being played down in New Orleans today by Landrieu, who to me did something today at 1 o'clock that should bring about his impeachment. We don't need the people dividing this country more than already is. Okay, we got to get out of here. The Captains are going to be in the studio in a few minutes, and their program comes up at 3:30. I want you to watch that. Don't forget, in the meantime, to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.